I'm working on a new blanket for my daughter's bed. It's going to be a surprise for her. So I'm going to just kind of show you how I do this. I'll show you a couple things tonight, and then I'm just going to quit for the night and we'll meet back up in the morning to finish it. I do a lot of craft projects. My blog has a lot of craft stuff, a lot of decorating, but I don't always put that on YouTube because I just don't always get in that mindset. And sometimes whenever I'm doing a project, I just get busy, start doing it, and don't think about stopping to tell you how to do it. So this is going to be a blanket that has two pretty sides to it, so she can flip it over. We can reverse it depending on how we want to decorate her room and have her bed look with coordinating pillows. But I'm calling it a reversible 4 seasons blanket, because we have it with the way that we're going to just do it very simply is going to be great for spring and summer, very lightweight, but then I'm going to be adding an extra element to it that's going to make it great for when the cold months come here, and it will keep her warm. But then we're going to be able to remove that so that she can use it all year long. And I haven't really seen this anywhere else. I'm not sure if this is out there. I kind of did a search on Pinterest, could not find anything like this, but this is a way, instead of using batting and making a quilt that would maybe make her feel too warm in the summer months, I wanted this to be something that could get her through an entire year and last a while, so I don't have to keep switching her bedding up. So I am coming up with a new technique that I have not yet seen. If it's out there, I'm sorry, let me know below. I'm not wanting to rip anybody off, but hopefully this is something that you can try, and we're gonna see how it goes. So let's get started. So first up, I have my 2 pieces of fabric, and I have them put right sides together, and I'm about to pin all the way around. But before we do that, I thought I would show you the fabric. This is from Joann's. I did 1.5 yards of each. And I've got this floral, which has a lot of different colors in it. The green, the peaches, pinks, purple, blues. And I thought this would be great to transition into fall, but really it can be used year round. But I love that it has so many different colors in it so that it could tie together with any other colors in her room. This fabric, also from Joann's, is a blue with a little bit of a mint hint to it. So it's kind of a blue minty color, and it's got these little gold hearts. Some are filled in and some are just heart outlines, and I thought it was really sweet. The same fabric was available in a blush pink, which would also work with this, but all of that pink was a bit of overload to me, and so I wanted to go ahead and use the blue because her fitted sheets are blue and her pillowcase is blue, so I thought it would kind of tie everything together. So these are the 2 pieces we're working with. I have already washed and dried them, which is very important because you want this to shrink. If there's going to be any shrinkage, you want it to happen before you sew. You don't want one piece to shrink and the other doesn't. It just wouldn't look good. So I have washed and dried these, and I have ironed them because ironing also will get out any wrinkles to ensure that you get a really good, to ensure that your pieces fit together very well and that you get everything straight and there's no bunching. So go ahead and take your time to prep your fabric ahead of time. And it's just some simple cotton fabric that's pretty lightweight, and I've laid them what we call right sides together. So basically they're going to be facing each other, and we will go ahead and I will start pinning all around the blanket. I'm going to be sewing the edges together, and the reason that I'm going to pin is because I don't want anything to shift, and fabric does tend to shift, especially the bottom fabric will shift a little bit differently than the top. So the pinning is going to ensure that we keep the fabric exactly where we want it in place. Let's get started on assembling and making and sewing, doing everything we need to do to get this wonderful blanket done. I've gone ahead and I've pinned it in place all the way around, and I've done my pins running kind of long ways. You could do them kind of running into the blanket, but I find that I can use less pins this way because it takes up more space. So we are going to sew around the edge of the blanket. We're going to leave an opening. I'm going to do it on the side probably on the other side over there. But so we'll start sewing about in here, go all the way around, and then when we get back to here, we'll stop. So we'll leave an opening so that we can turn the blanket inside out. And then it's gonna depend on you on what kind of seam allowance you want, whether it's 5/8 inch, half an inch, 1/4 inch, whatever you want to do, however far that you come into the blanket, that is up to you. But I'm just going to do a straight stitch all the way around, leaving that opening, and I'll show you a little bit beginning of it, but I won't be able to show you as I'm actually sewing because I will need both hands. So the sewing machine that I use on a most regular basis is the Janome model number 8050. I don't think they make this model number anymore. I think that model number was exclusive to Hancock, but you can get this exact same machine. It just will have a different model number because I think anytime they sell to certain stores, they might change the number. I could be wrong about that. But whenever you search for this on the Janome website or online, it may have a different number, but it will look exact to this, have all the exact functions. I have another Janome that is kind of the beginner model of it, and I keep it up at my parents' house as a spare sewing machine. And it's not going to have this display on it. It's going to be very simple, but it would also do the work. To be able to make this blanket, you just need to be able to really do a straight stitch, and later we'll do a buttonhole, but most sewing machines that you get at a very beginner level will be able to make this blanket. So I've threaded the machine with white thread, and I have white thread in the bobbin because this thread isn't going to show. So really, I just normally do white because it's a little bit cheaper sometimes than a colored thread whenever it doesn't really matter what color I'm going to be using. And then right here I have my box of pins, so as I'm sewing the blanket, I can take the pins out and put them right there. And I've got it set up. This is a straight stitch that is going to stitch just down the middle of my plate, so the needle is in the middle position. And then on your sewing machine, you should have something similar to this where your plate is going to have measurements. So if you wanted to sew 3/8 of an inch, half an inch, 5/8, so on, you will just follow the line. The edge of your fabric will follow up to this line here, and that way you always have a straight line. If you're new to sewing, just practice on some scrap pieces of fabric and you will get it down in no time. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get my fabric lined up, and we're going to get started. So I have my foot down and my needle is not in yet. You actually can put your needle down first, then your foot. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but I think that's what sewing professionals say to do. And I'm actually not starting at the very top corner up here because remember, we want to leave an opening. So I'm going to start a little farther down, and then when we get back around, I will sew here and then stop to leave an opening to flip it inside out. So I've started a little farther down, and I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch all the way around. So the edge of my fabric, it's a little hard to tell, but the edge of my fabric is meeting up to that 1/2 inch line, and I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch all the way around. So basically it's going to take about an inch off of my width and my length of this blanket. So if you wanted to do a little bit more, you're welcome to, or if you needed to squeeze a little bit less to not quite shave an inch off your fabric, just keep that in mind. I'm going to put my needle in the down position. I will hit start stop just one time, and then I'm going to back stitch. This is going to make sure you can actually just back stitch and then do this, but I just like to make sure my stitches aren't going to come loose, so I'm going to back stitch to make sure that that thread does not go anywhere and that that stitch doesn't come loose. Then I will push start stop to start sewing again. Okay, so I have done a straight stitch on all 4 sides of the blanket. When I got back around, rather than connecting it to where I started, I left an opening. And this is the opening that I left, being sure to back stitch here and here so the stitches wouldn't come loose. But this is how we are going to turn the blanket inside out so that we can move on to the next step. So now we're going to just pull the blanket through so that we see the pretty right sides. One thing you may want to do before you turn the blanket inside out is you may want to go to the 4 corners and just snip those, being sure to not get close to where the stitch actually is. You don't want to cut through that thread, but that's going to make it where your corners turn out a little bit nicer. You could even just snip a little bit in addition to that. A couple snips here and a couple snips there, and that will help your fabric fold and turn a little bit better. Now we have our blanket. It's been turned inside out so the two pieces are sewn together. But what are we going to do about this hole? Well, we're actually going to top stitch the blanket. The top stitch will close this hole, and will close where you see this wording. That's actually going to be inside the blanket. So it will close that up, but it also will give the blanket more of a finished look to have a top stitch all around, and it will hold the fabric in place, because if we leave it like this, the fabric may shift. So by doing a top stitch, it's going to keep this top fabric where you want it attached to the bottom piece of fabric. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go and iron this. I think it works better when you can iron down the seams. I think that actually going all around and getting your seams where they need to be and ironing them down and then pinning before sewing is usually the best method that I've found. So I'm back magically with a touch of makeup on and some wet clean hair. So I had to take a little bit of a break, but I have just sat back down and have started pinning my blanket. So I wanted to show you what that would look like. So I've pinned all the way around, and I'm using less pins than I did previously because the fabric is already sewn together, but I'm wanting to pin it in place so that this doesn't shift, there's no bunching, so that we can get a nice top stitch. So I've spaced out the pins a little bit more, but then I got here, and this is where our opening is, from here to about here. And I actually pinned a little closer to the edge to catch that fabric so that we can make sure to get a nice closed top stitch here. So I'm going to continue to go ahead and top stitch around the top. And if you're wondering, yes, I took off my fingernail polish in order to trim my nails and get a new coat on, and it stained my fingers a bit. So I've got some blue stained nails and skin. So that's why I've got a big transformation in between making this blanket. Sometimes you just have to stop in the middle of a project. Don't sweat it. I would love to be able to sit down and do a project from beginning to end nonstop, but that's just not what my life is like right now. And a lot of you are probably that some way, whether you're a parent or you've got a job or you've just got lots of other things that you have to take care of. You sometimes have to leave a project and come back to it. Don't sweat. It's okay. You'll get it done. Just leave it out where you can see it and make it in a place that is annoying. Like I've got this one in the floor, so I know I've got to get it done. I've got to get it out of the floor because this is where my daughter plays. So maybe set it on your dining table to really push yourself to finish it. Now, if it's like sitting there for a month, that might be a little much, but try to put it in a place where you're going to remember it, you're going to see it, so that way you can complete that project because you will feel so good when it gets done. So I'm going to go ahead and finish pinning this, and then I actually am going to eat dinner, and then we'll get back to this. It might be dark by the time that we sit down and get to the next step. Hi, you're going to hear some toddler talk in the background as my little girl's playing in the room while I finish up her blanket. So honestly, from the last clip you've seen until this clip, it's been quite a while because we've been really busy and I just haven't been able to get this blanket done yet. But I'll show you what I've done up until this point. I've gotten to the point that she can use it, but now we're about to add to it what is going to make it usable all year round, make it a really warm blanket. So let me show you what I've done to get it to the point that she's using it now. She is wanting to come in and say hi. So this is her bed. This was her crib that converts into like a day bed setup. And so this is the blanket. So I sewed it and then I turned it right side out and did a top stitch, just a very top stitch all the way around with the pink thread on top, the white thread on the other side. And so now we have it. It is great because I can tuck it under one side because she kicks off her blanket a lot in the night. It's reversible. We can turn it over to the side with the little hearts on it when we want. And I just added this piece from TJ Maxx. I had a lot going on this wall before, and I'll put a blog post down below of what her room looked like, but I just wanted to simplify it. And also, now that she's almost 3 and grown into a little girl, I wanted to put a piece that was just a little bit more simplified and girly. And so we are now going to take the fabric to add to this and add some buttonholes so that we can make this into a year-round blanket that she can use even when it gets pretty frigid in the winter. So what we need to do in order to take our blanket that's already made and is a great blanket for when it's not really, really cold, but is great for year-round, and we want to attach this, but we don't want to sew it on. We could have done that instead of making this a kind of a two-sided blanket. We could have done a fabric on nice print on one side and then done this kind of minky texture on the other side. But then there would be months, especially if you live in the South, there would be months that would be way too warm of a blanket. So what we're going to do is we are going to add buttonholes to the four corners of this blanket, and then we're going to put buttons on this. Now the reason that we're going to do the holes on this is because there will be times that you're going to want to take this off, and you don't want the buttons just left on here because you don't want it scratching them in the night on both sides. So that way, if you just have the holes won't bother them. But once we put the buttons on, you can turn the blanket in such a way that the buttons won't really bother them, or once you take it off, the buttons are with this. So you don't have just buttons hanging out with the blanket that doesn't have anything attached, if that makes sense. So we're gonna measure where we want the buttonholes to go. And for this, I would say, and this is what I do every time to remind myself, I get out my sewing machine manual and I read about my different buttonholes. I choose the one that I want. So get out your sewing machine manual. If you are brand new to sewing, this is the best way to learn. I grew up with my mom sewing, my grandmother was sewing, and I had, a family of sewers. And my mom taught me some things when I was really little, but whenever I was an adult and decided I really wanted to be able to make clothes, to make home decor, basically anything I wanted to make, I learned by taking the manual for my very first sewing machine that was like a real sewing machine that my mom gave me. I read the manual and I went through. It taught me all the different stitches. It taught me how to do the buttonholes. I went through, I got scrap fabric, and I just followed the instructions and tried to learn my machine. And then when I got a new machine, I did the same thing, even though I knew how to sew and it was from the same company. This machine worked much differently. Just read your manual. That will teach you how to sew. And then you can go online and watch tutorials like this to learn even more. But even though I've been using this machine for several years now, there's some things I don't do very often, like buttonholes, and so I like to go ahead, read up on it again, and I always test it out on some test fabric. It's just scrap fabric that's laying around, and I doubled it up so I would get an idea, make sure that I had my tension, everything set right. So this was the first one that I tested out for a button I thought I would use, but I didn't really like it. And so then I tested again with the buttons I'm going to use, made sure that it was the right fit, that my sewing machine got it right, and that I knew what I was doing. So test it out, read your manual, and try it out before you actually go into your blanket. Because once you sew a buttonhole, you can take the stitches out, but once you actually rip that hole open, you got it and can't move past that. So that's my recommendation. You may say a buttonhole is really intimidating and scary, but it's not. It's super easy. Your sewing machine will most likely come with a special foot that will do all the work for you. So that's what we're going to do, is I'm going to put buttonholes in the four corners of this blanket. So let's do that. Okay, so I've got the buttonhole in this corner. I haven't opened it up yet with the seam ripper. So to go to this corner, I've got to put the fabric on this side because it's been the easiest way I can figure out measurements. For this corner, I had it this way, all the excess fabric here, in order to make sure that my buttonholes are exactly the same all the way around. Whenever I get to this side, I've got to have my excess fabric this way, which makes it a little bit more difficult, but I'm just going to set up my fabric along this line right here, and we'll start sewing. Now I have my buttonholes, and here is the fun part. But make sure they're exactly where you want them, because you can always take a seam ripper and remove the stitches if you need to move the buttonhole over. So you're going to want to make sure that your button is where you want it to be. So once you know for sure, grab your seam ripper. We're going to poke the seam ripper into the bottom in between. We're not going to go in the stitches, but right here in the fabric that's in between, we're gonna poke the seam ripper and we're just gonna rip up. It's so satisfying. So I'm gonna go ahead, and it's very easy to poke through. You would think going through 2 layers of fabric would be difficult. Harlow is saying hello.
Hi, I'm Harlow. Nice to meet you.
So I've poked the seam ripper through, and now I'm just going to glide it up, and it's so simple. I'm just making sure, I'm trying to turn it for you to see, but I can't really do it, turning it there. And then you will stop when you get to the top of that buttonhole, and now you have a buttonhole. And you can take your button, push it through, make sure that it fits. This is the perfect fit, which if you use a buttonhole foot that comes with your sewing machine, it will measure it for you, so you'll always get the right measurement. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do that around all 4 corners, open up my buttonholes. So before we can add the buttons to the minky material, we first need to trim it down and hem it all around. So what I'm doing is I'm laying my finished blanket on top, and I'm gonna go ahead and measure, and then I will add a seam allowance. So I'm gonna add an inch to the length and an inch to the width, and I'll do a 1/2 inch hem all the way around the minky fabric. And I'm only going to fold it over once. I'm not going to fold it over twice, so you need to keep that in mind if you want to do that with your fabric, because this fabric will not fray. So I'll just do that once and then choose the right stitch that I think should work for that. Okay, so now I am stitching. I've got the wrong side up of my minky fabric, and I'm stitching 1/2 inch, and I'm only folding it over once because again, this isn't going to fray. Now if you don't want to see the raw edges, you could fold it over a second time, but you would need to keep that in mind before you cut the fabric, so you leave enough in the width and the length. But I'm just going to do it once because we're not actually going to see this bottom side whenever it is attached button to the blanket, but you could do it twice if you wanted to have a little bit of a nicer edge looking to it. So you could measure 1/2 inch all the way around and pin it into place, but I'm just measuring as I go. I measure 1/2 inch to about here, hold it in place, and then continue to do so. And I'm just sewing it with a straight stitch. You won't really see it. It will disappear into the fabric, and I'm using a white thread, but you could use a thread that's the same color as your minky. The white disappears into this kind of mint color. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to keep stitching all the way around and just do a nice little hem around the edges. Now I've got the minky hemmed, and here I have it on the wrong side because this is what it's going to look like when you have it attached. We need to decide where we want the buttons to be sewn on, and they're going to be sewn on the wrong side. So what I did is I lined up the blanket using the buttonhole as a marker, and you can kind of measure around the 4 corners to get the right measurements, and I just did a little mark which the button will cover, and then you're going to follow your sewing machine directions for how to sew a button on. You could also do it by hand, but your sewing machine may do it for you if you check the manual. We now have the buttons on the 4 corners, and if you wanted to, something you could do is you could come down the middle on this each side and do buttons there so that there wasn't any kind of opening and it was attached better. But since I'm going to be tucking it into the bed, I'm not worried about that right now. But I may come back later if it's not going to be tucked, and I may add more buttons. So you could do anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 buttons on each side and at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and button it to my blanket and see what it looks like. So now this is what it looks like. I haven't tucked it in yet because I want to show you the other side. I've been showing you the floral, but here's the gold side. I've got it buttoned, and so that way here's the soft side that will be against her to keep her warm and soft, and the buttons won't be touching her. And then whenever you unbutton it and you want to just use the blanket side, then there won't be it's hard to do that with one hand. Oh, I gotta thread that back through, but then there won't be any buttons that you have to worry about. And you want to definitely only do this for a child that is at the point that they're not putting things in their mouth to chew. So here's the soft side, and then here's the other side, and then we're going to reverse it so you can see what the other side looks in, and we'll tuck it in. Now here's the blanket reverse to the floral side, and it's finished. You've got the soft side that will keep her warm, the minky material, and then here is the floral side buttons. And then if you wanted to, you could do it reverse just like I showed you. I've got it tucked in on the sides and the end. If you don't have a day bed like this, you may only be able to tuck it in on the ends. But like I mentioned earlier, you could go in on each side and on the end to do an additional button, to do anywhere from 4 to 8 buttons. But here we go. This will keep her warm. It's soft.
Now can Max go on it?
You want to see your blanket? You want Max to get on your blanket?
Yeah. Can I get on my big cut too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is it soft? You like it?
I do like it, Mommy.
We finished your blanket! Yay!
Okay, guys. I love it so much. Thank you for making my house.
Thank you for coming to our house. Thanks for watching. We hope this gave you some ideas and that you can do.
Watching.
Yeah. Say see you later. Bye.
See you later. Bye.